That's what I'm talking about.
Wait! Okay, now, from the beginning.
Hit it, boys.
Welcome to Higher Ed Pulse, your no-fluff guide to artificial intelligence in higher ed. I'm Mallory Willsea, bringing nearly 20 years of edtech and marketing expertise straight to your earbuds. Higher ed leaders are expected to master AI overnight, but let's be real, no one has time to sift through every headline, hot take, or research report. That's why every Monday, I'll break down what actually matters. Fast, clear, and to the point. Want to sound like the smartest person in the room at your next team meeting? You're in the right place. Let's dive in. Welcome back to Higher Ed Pulse. I am here live at AMA, sitting across from Jason Smith, the managing director at OHO. Jason, welcome back to the Pulse. I had the pleasure of interviewing you a little earlier this year, but now we're here at AMA. What are you most looking forward to over the next couple days?
I'm super excited about reconnecting with colleagues. We've got a bunch of new meetings set up with folks, and I'm just excited to be here. It's been a year or two since I've been here, and excited to be back and reconnect with colleagues.
Love that. Listeners, if you didn't catch my episode with Jason from earlier this year, I highly recommend you go listen to it. OHO published some research around how prospective students are using generative AI, and it's great research, first of all. We'll put a link to it in the show notes. But the content for that episode, I have to imagine, inspired you to what we are going to be talking about today. OHO has recently unveiled a new AI Visibility Scorecard, and Jason is here to tell us more about that. So, Jason, let's talk students' search in AI, and what made you decide to build an AI Visibility Scorecard, and when did you really first realize institutions were losing control of how AI describes them?
Yeah, great question. So I think what we started to see was a lot of panic from people and a lot of concern that they were losing control of their message and they didn't know how AI was talking about them or what it was writing about them. And so I think we started with a sentiment of really wanted to help frame that problem and understand what are those sources and what kind of control do schools have over that to make those changes. And so this is actually a software tool, and it does help frame that question of understand against your peers and against other schools in your category, sort of how much of that content is coming from your website or from other sources.
That sounds really helpful. And so when you ran those first few tests, what were some of the surprises in the results that maybe you weren't expecting?
Yeah, I think the biggest surprise that we saw was that the majority of the content was actually coming from the school website. And so I think that, to me, is good news for folks. It's really encouraging because it means you control it at one level, for schools can actually make those changes. And so when I say most, I think we have a series of categories of questions. So academics, admissions information, reputation information. So the information that is much more transactional, much more control. And we're talking in the 60 to 80 to 90% range of schools. The sources of the answers is coming from your website. When you talk about reputation, it's a little more like 40 to 60%. So 50-50 kind of coming from other sources. And I think that was surprising to us as well too, and also super insightful. So people could say, yeah, I can't control everything, but I can control some stuff.
Okay, so I'm going to be real. When I hear that most of the content is coming from an institution's website, there is part of me that is like, okay, phew, right? Let's wipe the sweat off of our brow. That is good news. But then there's also part of me that's like, this is an issue because we know what happens with content sprawl on institutions' websites. And I mean, honestly, no one knows that more than you, having run OHO for, what did you say, almost 27 years, exactly. So what was your reaction when you saw that? And how is this maybe changing some of the conversations that you're having with your customers right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think content sprawl is exactly the problem. And I think what the scorecard shows you is where it's coming from, but it doesn't really assess the quality. So I think what we do once you do the scorecard is you benchmark against your peers. So you can see sort of how are you doing, which I think is helpful to have a conversation internally, but it also scores your content. So you know, kind of category-wise, where should you be looking of content to clean up? So I think once you get the scorecard, there's two things we'll provide services for you around, which is one, auditing the content and looking at the quality of what's there and making sure that it is clean, there's not contradictions, you don't have out-of-date content, that it's not pulling from some old random blog post from 10 years ago. And then also, where are the gaps? So where's their new information? So what is it going to other websites? And that could be higher education aggregator type websites like Niche. It could be news media. It could be Reddit. What kind of content is it not finding on your website, and is it going to get in other places? Those are the content gaps, which gives you a roadmap of content to make for your website.
So you mentioned this a little while ago, that you're actually benchmarking the results from institution A against others. I think a lot of the value from this comes from the benchmark. So tell us a little bit more about that. How are you thinking about that? And are you elevating out of just, maybe the peer sets of the local area?
Yeah, so we have kind of custom benchmarks that we're doing. And that's where we're picking a couple peer schools in your area, 5 to 10 schools. Then we're also writing benchmarks for different categories of schools. So R2 schools, so R2 research schools, small elite colleges. So we have a pool of 30 small elite colleges. So you get a sense. I think what's helpful there is that just the size, since we learned that the website is the good source of it, the size of those websites and how they're structured and how their content is produced and how much is there does really matter and does really influence what's there. So obviously, the bigger the website, the more chance of contradictions. I think what we're seeing on some of those smaller, kind of small elite schools, liberal arts schools under 2,000 enrollment, there's just not as much content, and the content is not as authoritative, meaning it's a little more sprawled among some of the different departments, and they're actually missing some content on the sites.
All right, so I'm the CMO who works at the institution that's getting this scorecard from you. What should I do first, and where do you feel like some of the fixes are most immediately in that CMO's control?
Yeah, great question. I would say back to, I think, what I just said, which is one, kind of auditing and looking for contradictions. So like our team, who's doing a lot of work around SEO audits and AI visibility audits, and there's a lot of overlap in those areas. And I think still good SEO practices are there. I think what we're trying to see is how we can be consistent. So making sure that there's not contradictions or old data. We had one program listing that we pulled up, and AI pulled up 5 responses, and I was like, well, those look good to me. And we showed them immediately to the leadership, and the leadership was like, well, those first 4 are true. That last one comes from a blog that we haven't had this program for 5 years. So but I think what's hard in AI, right, is we lose all that context, right? If you and I were looking at that blog, we would know that. So immediately, should that CMO do? They should cut off that blog, figure out how to sunset that information.
We've all been obsessed with SEO for decades now, but the game really is changing with AI, and you have produced research on this. There's many others in our industry and outside that have as well. How, in your opinion, does AI visibility just kind of change the playbook for digital strategy as a whole?
Yeah, I think the AI visibility part of what we learned doing this is that the AI platforms are actually they're doing web runs in general to kind of go and get this information. One thing, so I think what that means is good SEO is still important, still producing quality content is still really important, and it's still literally searching the web and then rewriting that answer. So I think we still need to do a good job and pay attention there. I think an area that is a little bit interesting, or just an insight that we learned, was that depending on which model you're using, some of the kind of lighter models or the less thinking or reasoning models are actually relying on content that is in the LLM itself, which is interesting because whereas Google's re-indexing your site all the time, the LLM might be using some of the knowledge that it has just pulled into the language model. And that's one thing we're looking at as we're trying to figure out how quickly can we make changes. And if you do the most thorough research, it will certainly go out to the web and grab that info. But if you're asking for a little lighter, it might use what it knows already. And so it might actually be harder to kind of make some of those influences. I think it'll eventually get updated, but we are seeing some influence that way. So I think we do need to still think about SEO that way.
All right, last question. If you could give every VP of marketing one piece of advice about staying visible in the AI era, what would it be?
I would say get ready to clean up your content. I think that's the main thing that's really going to be happening here. And then I think the second place where I would go clean up is I would start looking at things like Wikipedia. What we're seeing is really that is the first place. Your website is the first place that people are looking. It's then the LLMs are typically going to Wikipedia if they're trying to get answers to that. And at the moment, we're not seeing as huge of a social impact. So I think if you're thinking, hey, I really need to up my social game, there's not a clear impact. We're not seeing a lot of links and lots of things like that. We're seeing Reddit, Wikipedia, your website, and then some of these aggregator websites as being the kind of main sources of information. So if you're any way that you're involved in the content in that area, I would say get ready to kind of audit and clean that up. And I think have conversations with people about, why it's really important to sunset some of that content.
Incredible. Well, Jason, like I said, we're going to drop some links in the show notes for listeners to our previous podcast, to all of your great research. If folks want to give you a call and learn more about this scorecard, where can they find you?
Sure, absolutely. You can find us. Our website's just oho.com, and you can find information there. We're actually doing, as I mentioned here, a bunch of benchmark reviews with some clients, and we're doing some virtual ones afterwards. So there's a page on the site where you can sign up for that.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for taking some time out of your busy AMA schedule. I mean, it's not busy yet, but oh boy, we're on the precipice. Like, we're about to jump off the cliff in the next few hours. So thank you so much for sitting down with me. And listeners, keep an eye out for all of this great AMA content that's going to be dropping across the Enrollify network over the course of the next couple of days. Have a great one. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the Higher Ed Pulse. The show is a proud member of the Enrollify Network, home to Higher Ed's largest collection of podcasts. Enrollify is where higher ed goes to grow, so be sure to check out our other podcasts, webinars, video clips, blogs, and more. Visit Enrollify.org and subscribe for all the latest details and content drops directly to your inbox. Enrollify is brought to you by Element 451, the digital workforce platform for higher ed. Learn more at element451.com.